Greetings, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything about aviation, as you can see on the walls around me. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we interview some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from being in these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation environments? The purpose of our show is to show how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. A lot of the stories that you hear on the Lessons from the Cockpit show are being told here for the very first time. And today is one of those days. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show, episode 82, is sponsored by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. You can see one behind me on my wall of my KC-135 8874 that I flew when I was in Okinawa, Japan. These are 4, 6, and 8 foot prints, profiles, exhaustively researched and very detailed, printed on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. They're also, we found out, waterproof. We did some patches for one of my good friends. He's transferred them from one truck to another, washes the truck every 2 weeks. They haven't faded nor have they come off. If there's an airplane that you want, your favorite airplane with your name on it, your weapons load from a particular squadron, particular tail number, we can do that too. We have 145 ready to print, 4, 6, and 8 footers from World War II fighter planes all the way up to 5th gen fighters, F-22s, F-35s. We're working on helicopters. I have so much trouble with helicopters because I was never around them that much, but we're getting some helicopters done. And I just recently downloaded some good profiles on them. So go to wallpilot.com, pick out a couple of the ready to print airplanes, or fill out the custom form, send it to us, and let us make the airplane of your choice. On today's show, we have an A-10 pilot, Donk Strasburger, who won a Silver Star. He's here to tell us about some events during Iraqi freedom, and particularly the march to Baghdad. So grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Greetings, Colonel Ray Strasburger, callsign Donk. How you doing today, Donk?
Good afternoon, Sluggo. I'm doing spectacular, and I'm really, really excited about having the opportunity to spend some time with you and the team this afternoon.
Excellent. And you know what? I have so been looking forward to this because you and I were actually intertwined during OIF and didn't know it. Isn't that crazy?
I know it is. Reminiscing that night at the Aviator Bar in downtown Montgomery was fascinating for me.
I'll bet it was. So tell all of our listeners your background, and more importantly, how did you get your love for flying and wanting to fly A-10s?
Yeah, you bet, Sluggo. It's really simple. My father was a Marine in the South Pacific in World War II. He was a radio operator gunner on B-25Js, operating out of the New Hebrides group. And true to form for his generation, he didn't talk too much about his experiences as a Marine. But of course, we were all enthralled by the very small glimpse we would get into his past. And so I was very excited about my father's aviation legacy. And from the time I was about 7 years old and began making Revell and Aurora and monogram model airplanes.
You're speaking my language, brother.
Right? You know, I can remember trying to perfect my my camouflage paint job on F4s and F105s, and that's really kind of where I got the bug. And then it was perpetuated because my older brother, Frank Strasburger, he joined the Air Force pilot training at Reese. and he was one of the very first lieutenants to get assigned to the F-15C model out of pilot training.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I had a constant reminder when my brother would walk in the door on leave in blue. And that's how I got captured by slipping the surly bonds.
Yeah. So was he flying Eagles when you were flying Hogs?
He was. Yes, he was.
So a little bit of competition there, huh? All the Eagle guys or Eagle guys? What do you call them now?
So let me tell you, I started off in the Air Force as a B-52H Navigator.
Really?
And I did. I graduated from college. I had a pilot training slot. I went to my commissioning physical, and they said I had a problem with one of my eyes, and that I was no longer qualified to go to pilot training, but that I could go to nav training. And, you know, I really had maybe 3 or 4 goals. You know, I wanted to earn my commission in the Air Force. I wanted to serve my nation, and I wanted to fly jets. And if I could not do that as a pilot, then I was going to be grateful for the opportunity to do it as a navigator. And then when I showed up at Mather Air Force Base in the fall of 1984, and they gave me my physical, they didn't give me the same eye test that I had failed at pilot or at commission. And I asked them about it. I said, so how come you didn't give me that test? And they said, well, sir, we don't know how to explain this to you, but that was a beta test, and we figured out it was a bad test, and so we don't use it anymore. You're fully qualified to go to pilot training. And I said to them, I said, well, does that mean you're going to ship me out to pilot training? And they said, no, sir. Welcome to Navigator School. And so, but I will tell you this. I'll tell you this, Sluggo. I absolutely loved it. I loved the mission of the B-52. I was in Strategic Air Command at the time and K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base, but I never lost my passion for wanting to be a pilot. And finally, on my last opportunity, I got selected to go to pilot training. My DO, Lieutenant Colonel Mook at the time, made me sit alert for the next month while I waited to go to pilot training. And then I got the chance to go to Williams Air Force Base. And then I got Hogs graduating out of pilot training.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what it's like being a B-52 Nav and some of the roles that you fulfill in that airplane. Because, man, that has done some amazing things.
Yeah, it's a pretty spectacular platform. And I'll tell you, I think part of the reason that I loved it was the crew concept. Quite frankly, you know, everybody having to do their part to a level of subject matter expertise and accountability so that the mission would succeed. You know, nobody gets there on their own, regardless of whether you're in a crew aircraft or, frankly, you're in a single seater. It takes the entire team to contribute. But the thing I really enjoyed was I enjoyed the low altitude work. At that time, we were doing both high altitude work and low altitude work. And, you know, we would take off from K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base, and we would head to the Western United States and enter the Strategic Range Training Complex, or the STRC, Strategic Training Range Complex. And of course, we would drop simulated bombs and shoot simulated SRAMs, and the low altitude work was just very exciting. And my radar navigator, who really took pretty good care of me, fascinating guy. Mark Hensler was his name.
Mhm.
Taught me not only how to be a navigator, but he taught me how to be an Air Force officer, along with my gunner, Ronnie Rutledge, my staff sergeant gunner, Ronnie Rutledge. I really learned a tremendous amount about being an officer and a leader from both of them. And I think I think the crew concept, working together to achieve mission, the low altitude work, and then my radar navigator, Major Hensler, would make me do a celestial navigation leg all the way back to K.I. Sawyer. And that was about a 3.5 hour struggle session, I guess, because I was never very good at celestial nav. But I'll tell you what, by the time I left, Mark Hensler had taught me how to shoot both day and night cell, and to be pretty confident that, if we ever had to go to the show and go over the pole and fight the Soviet Union, we'd be okay.
Hey, explain to all of our listeners what celestial navigation is, because think about that. That's actually a lost art now, Donk, because of GPS.
Right.
And I remember doing
Yeah.
celestial nav legs in the KC-135, and pilot, don't touch those throttles, 1 degree heading changes, all those kinds of things. But walk us through what you would do when you did a celestial shot and what that means.
So, so in daytime celestial nav, it's obviously pretty easy because you can see the sun, and you can zero in on the sun, which is your primary reference. And of course, what you have to do is you have to consult a series of tables, and then you have to do what we called a pre-computation. And then the electronic warfare officer, or I, would put the sextant up through the port. We'd configure it with the appropriate dial settings, and we would zero in on the sun or the stars, and we would actually take a position reading, and then we would transfer that position reading to our charts, and that was theoretically, you were within about a mile of the spot that you plotted on the chart. In contrast to day celestial, night celestial is significantly more challenging, because what the goal is to, number one, find the right star, and then number two, you actually want to, if I remember correctly, you actually want to do 2 or 3 pre-comps, and you want to find 2 or 3 stars, and you want to be able to create some type of a triangulation, such that you can predict where your position is on the chart. And I'll tell you, celestial almost kept me from graduating from navigator training. But I had an instructor that I think was a very forgiving instructor, and he recognized that maybe at some point in my life I would show some promise, and he passed me on my celestial navigation check, my night celestial navigation check. But as I made mention, Paul Hensler, he really taught me how to do business, and he did build my confidence that if we ever lost our systems, we could navigate via the stars or via the sun.
Yeah, thank heavens for great mentors, huh, Donk?
So true.
We've had so many great mentors through our careers, people that we look back on that, we wouldn't have made it through without them, I find it fascinating too. Here you are using a sextant celestial, just like Magellan did. Here we are in a B-52, and you're using the same exact processes that that
Yes.
Magellan used to navigate across the ocean.
Right.
And look at that. That doesn't go away. Hundreds of years we've been using the sun and the stars to move around. All right. So, hey, you mentioned SRAMs a little while ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Is that what you guys carried on your B-52s up there, or did you do
We
outcomes
did.
also?
So I don't think outcomes were in the inventory yet.
Okay.
I remember we carried gravity munitions,
Mm-hmm.
short range attack missiles on a rotary delivery system in the bomb bay.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was there, we started fielding the Harpoon anti-ship missile.
Oh.
Right. And then I think it was after I had left that they started to field the Outcome.
Okay. Wow. See,
Yeah.
the FB-111s at Pease where I was during the same time period, they were SRAM launchers.
Right.
They carried B-61 and SRAM. You know, they'd have
Yeah,
B-61 in the internal bays.
actually
B-61s in, they had B-61s in the internal bay and SRAMs on the pylons.
Yeah, we had we could configure, if I remember correctly, we could configure with either B-28s or B-61s.
Wow.
As our gravity munitions.
Huh. When you talk about low-level navigation, tell my listeners how low you're going, how fast you're going, and where this range was, okay? Because this is really a fascinating story about,
sure,
for particularly a big airplane doing this.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, and I might get this confused with some of the graduated altitudes that we had in the A-10, but I'm pretty certain that we were certified at either 500, at 300, or maybe 100 feet. Now, clearly, 100 feet is low for any airplane, but I do remember in the strategic training range complex, which just covered a huge swath of the Western United States.
Yeah.
And it was, you were probably in the low level structure, maybe 3.5 hours, maybe. You'd probably visit 4 or 5 bomb plots, is what we called them. They were just training ranges, because all of our bomb drops were via tone. They were via radio tones. But I can remember very distinctly that in the STRC, there were times when the pilots had to climb to turn the airplane in order to ensure that you had wingtip clearance from the terrain. Now there's probably some of your listeners out there who may go, man, you can tell Donk's aged a little bit because he's making up stories now. But I don't think so. I actually do remember that we had to climb to make turns. And it was fascinating work. And of course, you're mapping everything off of the radar, which is the radar nav is controlling. And then we would set, it was called the FRL, I think, flight reference line. So we would calibrate the system as we were descending into the low altitude structure, and then we would calibrate it to keep us at a certain level above the terrain based on the radar information that was being fed into the offensive avionics system. And in the CCTVs or FLIRs, which the pilots had, there would be a line across that display. And all they had to do was keep the airplane level on that line. And that ensured that we were maintaining the altitude the system was calibrated.
That's amazing. Okay. Because I was just thinking when you were saying 100 feet, I'm like, wait a minute. The wingspan of the B-52 is like 300 feet.
Right.
You know? And yeah, you'd have to climb at 100 feet. I mean, to think that is a very large airplane. If
Right.
you're out on the range and watch that thing go over your head at 100 feet, you know, with some knots under it. Oh man, what a picture
Well,
that must have been from the ground.
Yeah, I yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not fabricating a story, because that was our tactic for penetrating, the borders of the former Soviet Union, and trying to, defeat the missile systems that they had at the time, which of course, nowadays the missile systems, the surface to air missile systems, are so significantly advanced that I'm not 100% sure how much terrain masking would do for you now.
Absolutely. Particularly with the S-300, 400s,
Yes, sir.
I mean, those are just amazing, as we've seen in Ukraine.
Yep. Yep.
So you go to Williams Air Force Base, you get through pilot training down there. How'd you love flying the T-38, man?
Oh, so every day I drive on to Maxwell Air Force Base, and I pass T-38 on a pedestal, and every single morning it harkens me right back to my first solo in the 38. And just what a spectacular airplane. And the interesting thing was, at least my experience, I was a class leader when I went through pilot training, because I was a captain.
Yeah.
And I actually, I think, performed better in T-38s than I did in T-37s. And that surprised me a little bit. I had some challenges in the 37. You'll laugh at this. I had an ongoing adversarial relationship with the guys in Stanaval, and I wanted, and when I say that, it was all very good natured.
Yeah.
But what I was trying to do was, for the rest of the class, I was trying to help them understand that, hey, Stanaval guys, they're not black hat guys. They're good guys, but they got a job to do. And they've got to make sure that you are capable of performing your tasks in a coordinated way, such that you can manage the airplane safely and effectively. And so I said to my flight, but I also said, there's nothing to be afraid of, because I know all of you are well trained, and when it comes time for your check rides, you're going to do exceptionally well. And so I asked if I could be the first one out the chute for the very first ride, check ride in T-37s. And I think it was
mid-phase.
Was it? I was going to say contact. I couldn't remember.
It's called your mid-phase check, and that's when you were thrown to the wolves.
So let me tell you what, Sluggo, I'd been talking so much smack to my classmates about how I was going to roll out there and I was going to crush Stanaval and I was going to blaze a trail of success. And brother, let me tell you, I busted that check ride before you knew it. And I must have had like 45 write-ups. I think the evaluator, once he realized I busted, because I think I forgot to retract the flaps.
Oh.
And once he knew I had busted, based on, you know, all of the bravado that I had exhibited, you know, he was going to jot every
single thing down.
And
he's going to
so
throw a lot of darts at that board.
He did. And I remember skulking back into that flight room. And of course, everybody knew I'd busted already. And you know, that was a lot of humble pie that day. But you know, you pick yourself up by the bootstraps and you get after it again the next day. Might have had one extra whiskey that night before I went to bed. But then, you know, thereafter, you know, kind of sailed through 37s comparatively smoothly. But then I always felt like in 38s, kind of getting back to that airplane on the pedestal, I really kind of flourished in 38s. Once I got to know that airplane, and once that, you know, I could strap that jet on instead of just flying that jet. It was like heaven. Heaven. Yeah.
So many good memories of T-38s, man, particularly formation.
Particularly and the power in those airplanes.
Oh, man.
Just fascinating.
Incredible. You know, I went to an 89 ride for my mid-phase check. Okay. And passed it. All right. Soloed out, did all that good stuff. All right. Then got to T-38s and couldn't do fix-to-fix to save my life.
Really?
I couldn't do a fix-to-fix. Yeah. I went to an 89 ride and because I couldn't do fix-to-fixes. Okay. And on my 89 ride, I got like within a quarter mile of it. And it was Vance. It was Vance to Tinker. Okay. So I didn't have a lot of time to figure this out. All right. And so we did a couple of these things, and sure enough, I had the T-38 squadron commander, you know, as the IP, and he says, well, you know, you've had challenges before, you know, Sluggo, I think you can make it through, you know, just keep going. And my formation check got a good, my instrument check, pulled out the golden golf tee, didn't have to do a fix-to-fix, did an en route descent into Omaha. Okay.
Awesome.
And passed, got it all done, man. And finished 2 weeks early. And as you know, you have to have your landing currency. So I got an extra solo ride in the T-38. Okay. And the scheduler was my instructor, you know, and he says, okay, so, you know, you got to keep your landing currency. Don't go out and do anything stupid. All right. And I made it through. Okay. I was last in the class, but I made it through. And ever since I was a kid, Donk, I'd wanted to fly 707s, and that's what I ended up doing. Loved every stinking minute of it. Every stinking minute of it. So now all of the fighter and attack pilots have to go through fighter lead-in training. Talk a little bit about that for just a second. Okay. And what that was for the A-10s, obviously it's more surface than air to air, but I'm sure you had to do both. So talk a little bit and tell my listeners what fighter lead-in is like, because you graduate from pilot training, you don't go right to the A-10 first. There's some things in the middle that you have to do too.
You bet. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. I think at the time I went through, I think we called it IFF, Intermediate Fighter Fundamentals.
Yeah.
I think was the name. And you know, you're flying a little bit of a souped up T-38. Different, I think slightly better motors, a little bit of a different paint scheme. I think the avionics were slightly different too, because you could actually drop bombs with the AT-38. And you know, you go out, you get familiar with the area, and then you start, you know, your basic fighter maneuvers, you know, learning how to maneuver three-dimensionally in relation to another airplane so that you can achieve a weapons engagement zone. heavily concentrate on formation flying, because clearly that's what we do in the fighter and attack communities. I mean, that's how we get to and fro.
Yeah.
It's how we employ.
Yeah.
And then you graduate from, your basic fighter maneuvers to a little bit of air combat maneuvering, which is, you introduce more jets, and you're now fighting, as a 2v2 or maybe a 2v4. And if you get lucky, you might get some dissimilar in there, where you might fly against, another Air Force fighter asset, or, if you're lucky, you could fight the Marines, or you could fight the Navy as well.
Yeah.
And then, if I remember correctly, after you demonstrate some basic proficiency in that, and I think you're 100% right. For the guys that are going to be primarily surface attack guys, you probably don't have to demonstrate quite the same level of proficiency in basic fighter maneuvers or in air combat maneuvering, because your bread and butter is hurtling your body at the earth. And but you've got to be credible. And so then you go on to surface attack, which is where you learn how to employ the airplane on just a basic bombing range, where there really isn't any tactical maneuvering. You're in a container, a pattern around a target, and you're dropping BDU 38s out of a 10 degree or a 20 degree or a 30 degree dive bomb. And then you graduate to surface attack tactics. At the very end of the course, there's not a lot of concentration on that, because you do most of that when you hit the RTU. But you do get the opportunity to learn how to maneuver airplanes in close proximity to the ground, in geometry, with each other, in coordination with each other, to prosecute an attack. And then I remember that very fondly. I absolutely loved it. I think at the time we did it at Holloman.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to kind of leave Williams Air Force Base in virtually downtown Phoenix, and go to Holloman. But I loved it. I loved my time there. And then once that was done, it was time to go to Tucson, and it was time to go to the A-10 replacement training unit at Tucson.
Donk, tell everybody what it was like shooting the A-10's gun for the first time.
Fascinating. I really don't even know how to describe it. The one thing that I remember most about the very first time, two things really. One was the vibration of the airplane. I wasn't really prepared for the vibration in the airplane. And then the second thing, the thing that made me most giddy about the whole experience, was the smell of cordite in the cockpit after having expended rounds.
I didn't even think of that.
Oh, Sluggo, let me tell you what, brother. It is like nectar for your soul. And I felt that way every time I shot the gun. Every time. Fascinating, but I'll tell you what, I almost didn't make it through the A-10 RTU. We did 3 primary bomb deliveries, and of course we shot the gun. And we would do short range strafe, or we would do long range strafe, or we would do 2 target strafe.
Mm-hmm.
We would do 10 degree pops, you take a look, you drive to the target, you take a little bit of an offset, and then you're kind of up and over and you're getting on a 10-degree wire. Those I was okay at. And then we did 20-degree low angle low drags. And then we also did 30-degree dive bomb. And the 20-degree low angle low drags were my arch nemesis. Because to be accurate, especially in the old A10A, to be accurate, you got to be plus or minus a degree on dive angle. You got to be plus or minus 5 knots on airspeed. And you've got to be, plus or minus 50 or 100 feet on release altitude. And I was not capable of meeting those parameters. So 10-degree pops, I was reasonable. 30-degree dive bomb, I was reasonable. All of the strafe events, I was reasonable. But that 20-degree low angle, low drag, brother, it caused me great anxiety. And I was always either unscorable at 12 or unscorable at 6. I just couldn't figure it out. And, those concentric rings around that target, the outermost ring, I can't remember exactly what the distance is. I think it's like 300 feet away from the target, 300 feet maybe.
Yeah.
To be unscorable at 6 or unscorable at 12 means you're lucky to hit the earth. And so, but I can't remember his name for the life of me, and this disappoints me because there was an instructor there who kind of took me under his wing, and it really didn't matter because every single one of them would have done exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
He just was the first one.
Yeah.
And really beat it into me how to fly that pattern. And I was never great at 20-degree low angle low drags, but I could qualify. And that's all I needed to get out the door and go to my operational unit at Myrtle Beach.
Oh, yeah. Again, another great mentor in your career that helps you get through that, I can still go back and remember every great mentor I had. 2 in pilot training, 1 in the tanker, that helped me get through some rough spots, as we shall say. And a matter of fact, there was one of my T-38 instructors, the 5 commandments of flying. I still to this day can quote those. That
wow.
He would have them on the wall behind him, Donk. And he'd say, okay, which one of the 5 did you bust today? Okay. Telling you that you busted the ride, right? But throughout my entire career, I never forgot those things. And I used them every stinking time, Rule number 1, fly the jet.
Right.
Rule number 2, instruments are your friend. Rule number 3, trim is like breathing. Rule number 4, radio calls do not generate lift. And rule number 5, above all else, sound cool on the radio. He had those behind him. All right.
Wow. That's cool.
And I, to this day, when anybody comes up and says, okay, give me some tips for flying, I'm just starting, everything like that, I give them those. The Marcus Carlton's 5 commandments of flying.
How cool is that?
We called him the doctor because he could fix anybody. He could fix any student. And, wow. I wish I could find him. I wish I could find, he's an old buff guy and then went into the B2s and just a fantastic instructor. Anyway, so you leave RTU and you show up at Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, man. Oh man. You talk about the assignment of justice. That was that was just fascinating. I was actually originally, Teresa and I were scheduled to go to Alconbury. We were supposed to go to RAF Alconbury in the UK. Might have been Bentwaters, but I think it was Alconbury. And we were really excited about that. And then unfortunately, Teresa's stepfather, he got sick.
Oh,
And we knew that he didn't have too much longer to live.
yeah.
And so I had a buddy of mine that had the assignment to he had an assignment to Myrtle Beach. And so I asked him if he wanted to swap so that I could be home and Teresa could be in close proximity to her mom and her stepdad.
Yeah.
And so he jumped at the opportunity to go to the UK, and we were very, very grateful to have the opportunity to go to Myrtle Beach. And I'll tell you what, I loved it. We loved it. It was fascinating. We had 3 squadrons of Hogs there. I went to the 356 Tactical Fighter Squadron, which was the Green Demons. We also had, I'm sorry about that.
No worries. That's a famous squadron too. That's a very famous squadron. That's been around for a long time.
It has, and it was fascinating. We had the 354th Falcons, I think, and we had the 355th Panthers, and then they had us. And interestingly enough, in the Green Demons, we had a tail number 666. Right? And everybody, kind of went to the ops desk and looked up at the board, and they didn't necessarily want to see that tail number assigned to their name. So
how appropriate in the Green Demons there would be a 666 tail number,
right? But I tell you what, that was a really, really great assignment. And the commander that we had was a guy named Mike Archer, and what a guy to have as your first fighter squadron commander. He was an incredible officer, incredible aviator, fantastic role model. I mean, he was the total package as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
And then I grew up under some guys that I loved. There was a guy named Bulldog Shoaf, and there was a guy named Skeeter Contop, and there's so many other guys that I could name, who they knew I was late to fighters. They knew I had some catching up to do, and boy, did they just take me under their wing and really, kind of invest themselves, pour themselves into me as a wingman. Oh, yeah. And one of the things that I always wanted to do, for a Hawg guy, you want to be a part of the combat search and rescue mission. You want to be a part of the Sandy mission, and you want to be able one day to fly with the Sandy 1 call sign and lead a rescue task force.
One of the toughest missions in the Air Force.
Yeah.
Combat search and rescue, man. And really all the pieces that have to fit together to find the survivor and pick the survivor up.
Right. And we were doing things the same way that they did in Vietnam.
With A1 Sky Raiders.
Right. We've got it was wonderful. And they knew that I wanted to be a part of that Sandy program. And I will never forget the day that we were in a squadron roll call or something like that. And the Bulldog Shoaf, who kind of ran our Sandy program, announced that I was going to enter the program and I was going to, be able to earn my spurs as a Sandy 4. And it was like I had died and gone to heaven. It was fascinating. And boy, that has always been my favorite mission.
Yeah. So tell all my listeners what that entails in the Hawg to be Sandy qualified and all of the things that Sandys do when you have a survivor down, because this is fascinating. And I have been obviously at the weapons school. One of the ME scenarios was a downed airman, and what the Hogs do during a CSAR is absolutely freaking amazing. So talk a little bit about the CSAR mission and how the Hawg does that for a few moments.
Certainly. You bet. So, now you've asked me to put myself into a compromising position because, every single A-10 weapons officer, past, present, and future, is going to critique everything I say. And I'm going to hear about it for time immemorial.
Send them my way. Give them my contact information. I'll tell them I'm the guy who asked the question.
That's great. So, you talk about teamwork, because you are 100% right. You've got the objective, who is the survivor on the ground or survivors. You've got the rescue helicopters. These days they take the form of our HH-60 helicopters.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the tankers, and whether it's the blue collar KC-135 guys or it's the KC-10 Gucci boys and girls, they're absolutely key to success. And then, there are even some times when you actually have a ground party that you might be able to work with in terms of a special ops infiltration team that might be involved.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got the Hogs, and it could run anywhere from a 2-ship, 4-ship, 6-ship. Just kind of depends on how large the effort is. And the way I would characterize it is number 1 and number 2 are responsible for finding and authenticating the objective. And then numbers 3 and 4 are responsible for the rescue package. So 3 and 4 are responsible for protecting the helicopters, both on ingress while they're on the ground for the pickup, and then while they exfil, hopefully with the objective on board. And one of the things that is difficult to do, I always thought, from the standpoint of being a Sandy 1, was you do your very best to ensure that you don't highlight the survivor's position. Because you can imagine that if you're the enemy and you see, you have a downed pilot or a downed aviator, and you see 2 airplanes, kind of like moths around a light, you're going to be able to pinpoint where that survivor is pretty rapidly. And so, trying to use visual means, trying to use electronic means, trying to use ISOPREP information to validate that the individual you're talking to is who they say they are, trying to ensure that you're not being spoofed by the enemy, who may have had access to one of our radios. So it's very challenging, I think, to not only execute that tactical portion of the mission, but simultaneously, you're orchestrating the entire package. You're synchronizing the entire package to be able to approach together insert and exfil. And I think, we may talk a little bit about it later, but I think the roles and responsibilities for number 2 and for number 4, from the standpoint of providing mutual support to the flight lead and the element lead, is absolutely critical. Because there's no way, back to our earlier comment about teamwork, in order to get the mission done, there's no way a single person could do all of this.
No.
Nah. So I think that mutual support, not only from a visual perspective, but from a comm perspective, from the ability to be a scribe, to establish timelines and to meet milestones, both number 2 and number 4 have a very significant job as well. And of course, the element that's responsible for the rescue package, if they don't do their job, it doesn't matter whether we've authenticated and identified the objective or not, we're not going to be able to pick them up. So pretty critical work to be done. And then, the synchronization with the rotary wing package, with the tankers, with a soft team, with electronic warfare assets that might be there to assist. There's a lot of plates in the air, and to pull it off successfully, even if not perfectly, is a huge success. Huge success. Our rescue guys, their motto is that others may live, and I've flown with a lot of rescue crews, whether it be H-860s or it's HC-130 refuelers, maybe even 53s back in the day. I've seen those people do some incredible feats of airmanship, and incredible feats of courage and bravery in the face of the enemy. And you can tell, man, it almost gets me a little bit choked up to think about what those people do.
Donk, I refueled PJ Johnson when he was doing his thing.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Do you know PJ Johnson was my first squadron commander in the 75th Fighter Squadron Tiger Sharks?
I did not know that.
Yeah. I served under PJ for, I think it was about 9 months or so.
Yeah.
And then Bino Turner took over. Rick Bino Turner. We unfortunately,
no, I heard.
Yeah, let me compose myself here for a second. We couple of months ago we lost Bino.
Yeah.
And it was a prolonged illness. His lovely bride Elizabeth and their daughters Mary Beth and Emma. It's been a pretty trying time for all of them, but I tell you what, we're going to put a happy spin on this, because when we went to his internment, it was Dallas National Military Cemetery. There were a bunch of tiger sharks there. There were a bunch of 511th vultures there. And we went back to their home. And my brother, Billy Bob Thornton, who we might chat a little bit about later, he had talked Elizabeth into permitting us to do one last fireside toast to Bino. And so Dr. K was maybe one of Bino's best friends. And Dr. K gave an incredible final salute. And then we all had our Buffalo Trace and our shot glasses, and we stood on the back porch and we destroyed those glasses against the stone wall of the porch. And the most fitting thing was there must have been 75 of us. And the
Oh,
very,
outstanding.
yeah, it was amazing. And the very last person to break that shot glass after having her shot was Bino's bride, Elizabeth.
Oh,
It was
what
very,
what a fitting end to that tribute too. You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we had one of the vulture guys go up to Billy Bob. I remember it very distinctly. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name. But he looked at Billy Bob and he was like, dude, I thought I was coming to a funeral. I didn't think I was coming back for a funeral. And then like a fighter pilot celebration where we do things the old fashioned way like we used to.
Yeah.
He goes, this was great.
Yeah.
And, you know, tears of joy streaming down his face.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It was awesome.
That's the way to send off a fighter pilot. You
It was
know?
awesome.
And so the day that PJ did his mission, we came in and we came in, yanked off of our regular mission, put together a crew. We went 40 miles into Iraq to save 32 F-16s. The guy that came to my boom had 800 pounds when we hooked up with it.
Dude.
We got all of them in gas, and Choctaw told us, turn west 270 now. We're like, what? And it was to help refuel those guys.
Wow.
Okay? So you were talking about packages and teamwork here a little while ago. PJ came up to us about 19,000 feet. We were stacked 19 to 21 as a 4-ship of tankers because we were refueling the wild weasels that were protecting them. And as you know, there's 100-knot disparity between the refueling speeds. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So we just went into this wagon wheel over the top of the area, and we sent PJ and his wingman to the back guy so they could just use angular cutoff to stay up with us. And God, I still remember the name of that wild weasel. Falstaff. They were called Falstaff.
Yeah.
I have now met that guy. Not too
How
long.
cool is that?
When I was writing my book, I met him and got to talk to him. He works in the F-35 program now down at Lockheed. But I can distinctly
Brother, you
remember.
know, it's a small world, man.
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
And here's the crazy thing, Donk. When I was teaching at the Joint Forces Staff College, the Captain Brooks Boatwright, who was our commandant, says, Sluggo, you need to go over and talk to that Navy sailor right there. And I go, why do I need to do that? He goes, you will recognize his name when you walk up to him. It was Boots Jones, the guy they picked up.
Dude. How awesome.
It was Boots Jones. Okay.
Isn't that?
It was Boots Jones. And you know what? I walked up to him. Of course, he looks at me and goes, hey, Lieutenant Colonel. I said, Boots, I know who you are. I said, you remember that day you got picked up? A bunch of tankers came over the top of you. We were fueling the hogs and the weasels that were protecting you. He goes, were you one of those guys? I said, I was number 3. I refueled the weasels. And he said something to me. Again, this makes me emotional too, brother. He says, Sluggo, as long as I'm here at the Joint Forces Staff College, you will never have to buy another drink.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Never have to buy another drink. Okay.
Yeah, brother. I mean, you're straight, you just never know. You never know when
you don't.
When you're cradling somebody's life in your hands.
No, you don't. Okay. And again, here we are saving the F-16s, and we're told, hey, you need to turn now and go out here. And we're like, what? And can you guys go down any lower? Well, yeah, I guess so. There's a cloud cover underneath us. They're not going to be able to see us. We're still inside Iraq. And we did what we needed to do. Like you said, it's teamwork, and the rules kind of go out the window when you're trying to save one of your own. And Moccasin 05 was the name of the Pavlo that picked them up. There's a great book, maybe you've heard of it. It's called On a Steel Horse I Ride. And it's about the CSAR pickup of a lot of these guys. And that story's in there. On a Steel Horse I Ride, And Donk, you can download it off the web. It's one of the AF book, Air Force books that you can download off the web. And it has that whole story in there about Moccasin 05 and
Wow.
coming in and picking those guys up. So, but yeah, that was my introduction to CSAR was, what are we doing here? We're refueling these A-10s. And then Choctaw told us they've got a survivor. And it was from the F-14. And Choctaw told us the Tomcat that got shot down, we've got one of the guys. Unfortunately, the Rio didn't make it, but he got captured. But yeah, that was my introduction to CSAR.
Man, nothing like doing a combat CSAR for your first introduction.
No.
You said something earlier, when you're talking about the rules kind of going out the window. And I completely agree with you. When I was a commander, maybe even a DO, my guidance and intent was, find ways to say yes. An 18-year-old warrior's life might depend on what you do today.
Yeah.
And what that meant to the team was, hey, whatever I do today or whatever I do tonight that is different, dangerous, unorthodox, I have to be able to come back to the squadron, to the ops desk, to the leadership, and I have to explain how the things that I did met commander's guidance and intent.
Yeah.
And I always told my guys and gals, I was like, if you can come back to me and you can look me in the eye and you can explain to me how what you did or didn't do met that commander's guidance and intent, I'll back you up 100% every day. Alternatively, if you are unable to demonstrate how you met commander's guidance and intent with what you did or didn't do, then you will face my wrath before you face anybody else's.
Yeah, our discussion will be a little longer.
Correct.
Yeah. And you and I have both been in that situation, haven't we?
Yeah, right. And it's about that accountability thing, right? Yeah. It's about, hey, you got to walk the talk.
Yeah.
And you can't be foolish when you're in the air.
No.
You got to be doing things for the right reason, and it has to be executed in a disciplined fashion.
And man, there was a lot of discipline that day, and still makes me emotional when I think about that day, and then getting to meet Boots Jones later on, and here's the thing. You do not know how significant your role may be in something like that until years later, where I got to meet the guy that they pulled into the helicopter. That famous picture of that PJ going out and grabbing him. I'm sure you've seen it, where they're grabbing Boots and throwing him on the helicopter. Okay. That famous picture, and I remember seeing that picture over and over and over again. And all of a sudden I'm standing in front of Boots Jones, and both of us have a lump in our throat because of the interaction we had, and we didn't even know each other's name. Didn't even know each other's name.
I'm with you, brother. If you don't mind, because I think it's important, it'll help illustrate something. Do you mind if I turn around and I open up my door and I
go right ahead? Go right ahead, brother.
There is there's something that I want to reference here. It may not be right this second, but I want to be prepared.
Sure.
To talk about this. There's you know, I know at some point in time we're probably going to talk about the Silver Star sortie.
Let's do it right now then. Let's do it right now.
Well,
I'll give you a chance
sure.
to thumb through there. Okay. So
Yeah.
let me set up a little bit of background for, while you're
Okay.
thumbing through there. Okay.
Okay.
It's a monster freaking sandstorm. My roommate, Donk, was the chief of weather for 9th Air Force. Big guy, big bodybuilder. Okay. And
Kind of
absolutely,
like you and me, huh?
yeah. Yeah. Lifting Doritos or something like that. And
that's fun.
His first name was Fred. And you go into any muscle magazine and they always show these big muscular guys the same way. Big arms, big chest, big legs, little itty bitty head.
Right.
And his first name was Fred. So his call sign was Fred Head. Okay. And he was the chief of weather for Mosley. He comes into the room because I worked noon to midnight, and I was just waking up about 8-9 o'clock when he came in after the mass brief with Mosley. And he said, Sluggo, get out your sand gear. You're going to need it for the next couple days. And I says, Fred Head, what do you mean? And he goes, by tonight or tomorrow morning, we will have 75-mile-an-hour winds with blowing sand and dust. And any exposed skin is going to feel like 1,000 needles hitting you. And remember how talcum powdery, fine the sand was over there in a lot of places,
Absolutely.
And I thought to myself, how is that going to hurt? He goes, it is, and it's going to get everywhere. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to get into every crevice that you can possibly imagine. Just get prepared for it, okay? And so I remember that afternoon over the big voice at PSAB, they were saying, do not come out unless you have to. Go to the chow hall, come back. Go to your room, stay there. Go to work, come back, because of the nasty weather.
Mm-hmm.
And you, my friend, were flying in that nasty weather.
Yeah.
And I remember watching tankers take off, F-16s take off, at Prince Sultan. The Brit Tornadoes, a slew of EA-6Bs. Fortunately, the wind was only like 10 degrees off of runway heading, but they're taking off in 65-mile-an-hour freaking winds because the show's got to go on.
Right.
And Mosley said something to me. One day, it was the 4th night of the war, and he comes up to me, back to your point. Sluggo, there's 18, 19-year-old kids getting shot at in Karbala. We have to support them. We're having to travel too far for the gas. I need you to move the tankers into Iraq. And all of us went, what? He says, Sluggo, figure it out. Figure it out. Okay. You guys have been so good at figuring this stuff out. I want you to figure it out. All right. I said, okay, sir, we will. And we came up with some really unique ideas that we'd talked about at the weapons school, the tanker weapons school, that we'd never got to use. But we opened the first two just south of Baghdad. We called them Shania and Reba. I named them all after female country western singers. But I remember very distinctly watching CNN and Al Arabiya and all these things showing all of the military, all the Army guys, Marine guys, all hunkered down trying to weather this storm. And you were flying in that on that day, weren't you?
Yeah, it was pretty miserable, Sluggo. I'll tell you that. So Billy Bob and I, so Greg Thornton, Billy Bob and I, he, at the time, I was the 75th DO.
Yeah.
Bino Turner was our commander. Yeah. We had forward deployed to Talil, to use Talil as a forward operating location to support the battle for Baghdad.
Yeah.
So Bino and about half the squadron, maybe a little bit more, were back in Kuwait. And then there was a group of several of us. We had a consortium.
Mhm.
We had 3 Air National Guard units. We had 1 active duty unit, which was the 75th.
Yeah.
And we combined forces to go to the FOL and to stand up operations there. And so we were flying. It was the 6th of April was the day, 2003. And
oh, and I should
Billy
tell
Bob and
everybody, I should tell everybody real quick, Talil wasn't our airfield. That was an Iraqi airfield.
Correct.
That's an important point. We took
Yeah.
over an airfield in Iraq and put
That's correct.
A-10s there. Okay. I know the Air Mobility Command guy that was there that was running all the logistics. And he you can imagine that's an amazing story too. But
I bet.
I wanted to tell all my listeners, this airfield we're talking about wasn't ours. It was an Iraqi airfield that we took over that you are flying from, Doc. Now go from there.
Okay, we'll do. So, Billy Bob and I, we're both instructors, and we're combat pairs, which means that Billy Bob and I have been flying together very, very consistently for quite some time. And so we are together a very integrated and synchronized, well-oiled machine. We know each other well enough in terms of how we perform in the air that we can almost predict kind of the decision-making process that both of us will employ, the actions that we will take, and in most cases, you don't even have to confirm via radio calls because we've established contracts with each other and we've become so familiar that we can predict what each other is thinking and what we will do. And so Billy Bob led the first sortie of the day, which was in support of Marines that were doing some house clearing operations in Al-Nazariya. And then we landed back at Talil, and as we would do, we would swap off. I was the flight lead for the second sortie, and he was the wingman for the second sortie. And so we took off, didn't have a tanker frag. We expect we'd probably be airborne for 2 hours and 15 minutes, maybe max. Didn't exactly know what was going to happen, but we started traveling higher altitude, probably in the high teens, early 20s, low 20s. And out in front of us, we can see this sandstorm, and we can see that there are embedded thunderstorms in this sandstorm. And so we contact the Air Support Operations Center, check in, with our playtime and our ordnance load, and we stand by for tasking. And in the not too distant future, we get told to call Advance 33, who is serving as the ground liaison officer with Task Force 269 Armor. And they have a potential reconnaissance mission for us. So Billy Bob and I are flying in line formation. Billy Bob, as per usual, is providing outstanding mutual support, and he is maintaining perfect formation position. Probably one of the best Hawg drivers I know. And we get rolled over to Advanced 3-3. And of course, and I'm certain most of your listeners know, that when you change radio frequencies, there's a requirement to authenticate the next agency.
Yeah.
And, you use a matrix to figure out how you're going to authenticate. And it would be something along the lines of Advanced 3-3, authenticate Alpha Charlie. And he would look on his grid, which matches mine, and Alpha and Charlie, where they intersect, it's X-ray. And so we expected to hear X-ray. And that's not what we get. we got a very excited young man on the radio that says, "Hey, Donk, it's Coke Bloker." And
Oh no.
oh yeah. And so Sluggo, clearly we had an immediate authentication. We knew
Didn't
that we
you
weren't-
though?
We knew we weren't being spoofed, I'll tell you that. So here's the this goes back to that small world thing, and it's amazing. Months earlier, Coke, Billy Bob and I, all 75th Fighter Squadron. Coke is in Billy Bob's flight. I'm the DO. Billy Bob has to call Coke into his office, and I can't remember if I was actually in the office or I just got a debrief. I think I was there. Billy Bob will school me to 100%. And we're telling young Captain Bloker that he is going to fight on the ground in Iraq with the 3rd Infantry Division. He will serve as a ground liaison air officer. Yeah. And he is not going to be able to strap on his trusty steed and fight from the skies over Iraq. He will fight on the ground. And I know that that was a very disappointing meeting for Coke. It was also very sobering for Billy Bob and I, because we knew we were going to go into combat. Coke and his lovely bride, Jamie was pregnant with their first son. And, you know, that decision weighed heavy on us because we knew that we were putting Coke into a different threat envelope than what he expected.
Yeah.
But as Coke always did, he saluted smartly and he pressed out. He joined the 3rd Infantry Division and drew his gear. And don't you know, on 6 April 2003, he's attached to Task Force 269 Armor, and he's serving as their battalion air liaison officer, asking his flight commander and his DO to provide a reconnaissance mission on behalf of the task force commander. Task force commander was J.R. Sanderson was his name. I'll tell you a story a little bit later that is very akin to the story that you told about Boots. And they're asking us to do a reconnaissance mission. They've been on the road march, started at Karbala Gap, traveled northbound. They're going to Objective Monty, which is the Muthanna Bridge on the northwest side of Baghdad, with the intent that they will seize that bridge such that the Iraqi Republican Guard in Baghdad could not use it to exfil and get into the deserts of northwest Iraq, regroup, and reattack. Simultaneously with this sweeping right-hand movement by Task Force 269 Armor, U.S. Marines are approaching Baghdad from the east. And the intent is that the Marines and the Army will join at the northern boundary of Baghdad, and they will seal the city so that the Iraqi Republican Guard cannot exfil. And because the weather is so bad, Coke is asking Billy Bob and I to execute a reconnaissance mission and see if we can detect any enemy forces on the to the east of the Tigris River. The Muthanna Bridge crosses the Tigris River east to west. The river itself flows north to south. Mm-hmm. They are approaching Objective Monty, and they want us to do a reconnaissance mission. And I'm thinking about my own commander's guidance and intent with regard to find ways to say yes. And I'm asking myself if a reconnaissance mission meets the threshold for me to violate the rules of engagement. At that time, we were not permitted to descend below 10,000 feet. And I knew, based on the storm, that in order to do what J.R. Sanderson wanted me to do, we were going to have to go to some low altitude level. Not sure what it would be yet, but we'd have to break 10,000 feet. And so I was in my cockpit and I was debating that. And the next thing I know, the radio exploded. Small arms, squad automatic weapons. I could hear the octave in Coke's voice raised just a little bit, very controlled, but nonetheless, it was an octave higher. And I could hear major explosions in the background. And now Task Force 269 Armor is in contact. They're under heavy fire. And Coke said to Billy Bob and me, "We need you in here now." And so I described that Billy Bob was in a perfect line formation on me. Well, when I glanced over at him, he had kind of moved into a wedge. As soon as he heard the traffic over the radio, he knew we were going into the weather. And he knew that we were going to violate rules of engagement, and we were going to do whatever we needed to do to find ways to say yes. And so he was prepared even before I was, I think, to descend and find a way to help. And so Billy Bob, I put him into a trail formation on me. As you know, no radar in the Hawg. So we went air-to-air TACAN, took up an altitude stack, and we just kind of started working our way through the sandstorm and the thunderstorm. We knew that the highest obstacles in vicinity of where we were towers at approximately 2,000 feet. So we knew we could get down to 2,000 feet without worrying about hitting any obstacles. Yeah. And don't you know, as we're in the descent, we're reconfiguring all of our weapons switches from high altitude employment to old-fashioned low altitude employment, which we hadn't practiced for quite some time. We get down to about 2,000 feet and I still don't see the ground. I think that we are west of the target area, but I'm not 100% sure. And so I put Billy Bob into a hold at 35 or 4,000 feet. And I continued my descent as I drove south with the intent that if I could break out and I could find the Tigris River, I would navigate up the Tigris River to find Objective Monty. And so that's what I did. And I found the river. I broke out, and we estimate that the weather was at about 1,200 feet and the visibility was at about a mile to a mile and a quarter. And of course, we all know that in peacetime operations, you know, you've got to be 1,500 foot ceiling and you got to have 3 miles of visibility. Yep. Well, we're not operating in a peacetime environment, so nope. We're going to have to violate, you know, what better judgment might tell us. And we're going to fight closer into the target area than what we anticipated. I should set the stage. Now that I've found the river and I'm flying northbound, Task Force 269 Armor, about, I don't know, 5 to 7 clicks prior to the west of Objective Monty, had been involved in a complex ambush that the Iraqis had executed. And so my understanding of the situation on the ground, and I think that this is accurate, is when they had established, J.R. Sanderson had established a forward arming and refueling point where his Abrams and his Bradleys were going to get gas and they were going to rearm, and then they were going to proceed to Objective Monty and attempt to seize the bridge. Mm-hmm. During that forward arming and refueling operation is when the Iraqis triggered their complex attack. And J.R. Sanderson had a decision to make about sending his spearhead element forward while the remainder of the combat team fought through the Iraqi ambush, so as not to lose time seizing the objective. And so, as I understand it, JR made the command decision to send his spearhead element forward. They were low on gas. They were low on ammunition of all types, and they were to occupy hasty defensive positions on the western bridge abutment. While we checked in with Coke is about the time the major portion of this ambush was taking place. And so we knew that the spearhead elements were not necessarily prepared to engage the enemy if they encountered the enemy. Now, make no mistake, a U.S. Army trooper, just like a U.S. Marine, is going to engage the enemy with whatever they have available to them, whether it's an M1 main tank round, whether it's a 25 millimeter chain gun on a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, or whether it is an M4 or a K-bar knife. They're going to find a way. And our job was to assist them to the maximum extent possible. And so as I'm flying up the bridge or up the river, I can't see the bridge, and I have a sloping cloud deck. So rather than being at 100 or 1,200 feet anymore, now I'm starting to encroach on 900 or 800. And I asked Coke if I could shoot 2 Willie Pete rockets on the eastern bridge abutment with the intent to do 2 things. 1, establish a line of demarcation between forward friendly elements and forward enemy elements. Mm-hmm. And then 2, to establish a unit of measure by which Coke would be able to direct or redirect our fires so that he could correct us using that unit of measure onto enemy targets.
What an incredible way to do that.
Yeah, it works exceptionally well when it works. And so I called in hot with white phosphorus rockets.
Yeah.
Bridge finally blossomed enough for me to see it about a mile. I probably was at about 600 feet or so. And I pushed that pickle button twice to shoot 2 Willie Pete rockets, and nothing happened.
Oh, jeez.
So let me tell you a story about Master Sergeant Michael Streeter, our production supervisor. One of the best maintainers, the best production supervisor I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I had 3 combat tours with Mike Streeter Street, and we flew 18,000 combat hours in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and that man and his maintainers enabled us to never miss a vulnerability period.
Oh.
In 18,000 combat hours.
That's an amazing record. That's an amazing record.
It's incredible. We may have had some airplanes take off late. We may have had some airplanes be compelled to rejoin in the area, but we were always there to cover our vol period. So I pushed that pickle button. I got no rockets, and I made a mental note to myself that when I got back to Toledo, I was going to have a conversation with Master Sergeant Michael Streeter about the failure of my rockets to leave the pod. And so I told Coke that I was going to overfly the eastern bridge abutment. I was going to expend self-protection flares, and he would be able to at least confirm that we didn't have any friendlies that were to the east of that position. And everything to the east was enemy. Interestingly enough, as I understand it, Coke did not actually go forward with the spearhead element to occupy those hasty defensive positions. He actually stayed with JR as they attempted to fight through this ambush.
Wow.
And so it was fascinating because of the weather. I'm not 100% sure that if Coke had been with the defensive element, he would have even been able to see our airplanes until the final moment of prosecuting our attack. Nonetheless, I came off. Coke confirmed. I asked for a reattack with guns. I proceeded to the south. I found the river. I flew up the river again in a very predictable fashion. And I got the opportunity to strafe an enemy BMP right at the eastern bridge abutment as they were trying to cross from east to west. And a blind squirrel finds an acorn, and I destroy the vehicle. And so at that point in time, we were employing flares, we were employing chaff. We had been briefed on surface to air missile threats. We had been briefed on anti-aircraft artillery threats, and certainly we had been briefed on man-portable man-pads, surface to air missile systems. Billy Bob has a very, very intense experience on one of his runs to destroy a T-72 tank, where he has what we think is a man-pad get launched from the eastern bridge abutment, and it streaks right past his canopy. But thank goodness misses his left engine and just streaks past his airplane. But I will tell you, when he pulled off that pass, because he had to regroup, he used some very choice language on the inter-airplane radio. And then he asked Coke for an immediate reattack, which he successfully prosecuted. So we didn't really, between Billy Bob and I, we didn't really have a whole lot of visual mutual support that day. There was a lot of comm support. There was a lot of external agency support. But when we were prosecuting attacks, most of the time we were prosecuting a single ship, because we wanted to have visual mutual support, but I made the decision, right or wrong, that we were going to expose ourselves as single ships so that both of us didn't get taken out at the same time. So, Sluggo, the whole engagement lasted about 33 minutes. We finally got to the point where we got enough burning in the target area that the low visibility wasn't quite as much of a factor for us. As we looked into the target area, we could see, the burning black oil of smokes and of tanks and BMPs and auxiliary fuel vehicles. Because what happened is elements of the Hammurabi Republican Guard were actually trying to exfil and use that bridge. And we caught them in the act. That BMP that I strafed was the first vehicle trying to go across the bridge. And of course, our guys were about 300 meters away in hasty defensive positions. Billy Bob is the real hero of the day, in my view, from the standpoint of bottling up the enemy, because after I blew up the BMP, we swapped roles. Billy Bob became the shooter. I became cover. And Billy Bob found two T-72 tanks that were about 100 meters behind the BMP and were trying to cross the bridge. And if I remember correctly, Billy Bob killed both of them. And just phenomenal work on his part. And so we realized after the second pass or so that, number one, we were predictable. We kept flying from the south to the north to try to find the target area based on the visibility. We were not able to unrestrict our attack axis until after we got something burning in the target area, and Coke gave us approval to do that.
Yeah.
So we were 4 or 5 runs into it. And then the other thing that we noticed was the AAA was getting more significant. The enemy gunners, I didn't realize it at the time, but they started to take shots at my jet during my reconnaissance run. And every pass that we did thereafter, the AAA just became more intense for each one of us. Thankfully, though, through maybe some skill, maybe a little luck, maybe a lot of divine intervention, both of us made it back to Talil without any holes in our jets. And so we finally got to the point where Coke told us that JR was a very satisfied task force commander. He wanted us to continue doing what we were doing. We were taking the pressure off, and we were enabling them to rejoin with their spearhead element, such that they could provide supporting fires to them. And we finally got to the point where we had taken the pressure off, where we asked Coke with our last 2 strafe passes if we could take a shot at killing some of the AAA pits that had been shooting at us. And we did that with his approval, because we had another set of A-10s that was going to come into the target area after us. And we wanted to try to clear out as much of the enemy surface-to-air activity as we could. And so finally, we reached Winchester. And there's an interesting part of the story that I'll tell here. And it has to do with the tanker that was supposed to meet us at about 21,000 feet to the northeast of Baghdad after we had prosecuted this particular mission, so that we could get back home to Toledo. And about midway through the engagement, we knew that we were going to have to stay. We knew that we were going to have to lower our bingo fuel. And we were going to have to depend on refueling with a tanker to get back home with the fuel reserves that we were required to have. And so I asked Billy Bob to go work a tanker for us. And he did. Another reason why he's such a spectacular A-10 pilot is because at the same time he's trying to provide mutual support for me, same time he's prosecuting his own attacks and destroying the enemy wholesale, he's talking to the Air Support Operations Center, and he's working a tanker for us, and he gets one. And so we lowered our bingo by, 400 or 500 pounds. Felt pretty comfortable. There was going to be a tanker waiting for us. And lo and behold, we find that that tanker is not available to us.
Oh,
it's okay. They got flowed to a higher priority mission. There's a lot of stuff going on in Iraq, in vicinity of Baghdad.
Particularly at this time period.
Right. Higher priority air refueling requirements. So we are climbing out of Baghdad. We feel as if we've taken the pressure off for Task Force 269 armor. And we are climbing to the northwest and eventually working toward the east. I'm task saturated at the time. At this time, the storm has moved to the east. The visibility is improving. We're in scattered clouds with several miles of visibility. And I am task saturated my nose gets too high and I get down to about 140 knots.
Oh.
And the next thing I hear is move. And the only thing that I can do is kind of sluggishly roll over on my back and split S back down into the threat envelope.
Oh.
And what had happened is it was Billy Bob. You know, we are taught call sign, directive, descriptive. And all I got out of my brother Billy Bob was move. And so I did. And as I rolled over to split S, I looked over my shoulder and there were 4 black bursts with red fireballs in the middle. Billy Bob had seen the AAA take the first shot at me. It was behind my aircraft. He knew that they would correct and they would lead. And so that's when he told me to move. And sure enough, that AAA burst was right where I had been.
Oh.
So you can imagine that Billy Bob doesn't buy a whole lot of whiskey when we're together.
No.
To your point earlier.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I eventually get the opportunity to recage. We get rejoined. We discover the news about the tanker. We climb up to save gas. We're on the RTB to Talil. And where do you think that sandstorm and that thunderstorm are now? Talil. And so Talil is a day VFR only field. As you made mention, it was only 4 days or 5 days earlier that 3rd Infantry Division had swept through and taken Talil.
Yeah.
And so there were no nav aids, no lights. And you know how it is, and I'm certain your listeners know this too, is that when you're flying in a sandstorm, you can look directly down and you might be able to see the ground. But as laterally, you can't really see.
Nothing.
And so Billy Bob and I went into that air-to-air TACAN trail again. We went into a spiral pattern. In retrospect, that may not have been the smartest thing to do because that's probably pretty good vertigo-inducing maneuver in a sandstorm.
Yeah.
But I felt as if we were pretty close to the airfield, and I asked the tower if they had any lighting, you know, just a flash gun in the tower.
Yeah.
And they said no. Well, we had special ops guys that were preparing for a night sortie that were on the parallel taxiway. And one of the CH-46 guys came up over the tower frequency and said, "Hey, DMOB 7-1, I can turn on my landing light if you'd like me to do that."
Oh.
And I said, that would be spectacular. So I'm on what I think is about a 5-mile final, and Billy Bob's in trail, and I see this light come on, and it is right in the front of my HUD. And so I am lined up on the parallel taxiway. I know the runway is to the north, and so I eke it over to the north a little bit. I eventually acquire the runway, and I got the jet safely on the ground. Probably one of the worst landings I ever had, but nonetheless, safely on the ground.
I am on the ground.
Right. Billy Bob got on the ground. I'm not going to tell you how much gas we got back with. If I remember correctly, 1,200 pounds is min fuel. 800 pounds is emergency fuel. Yeah, we landed pretty low on gas.
Yeah.
Got back to the chocks, and both of us, JB Brown was my dedicated crew chief. And JB Brown, for some reason, he didn't come to my desk. He went to, or my jet. He went to Billy Bob's jet. And I looked over, and I saw Billy Bob handing his things to JB. JB was carrying his helmet bag and his saddlebags down the ladder. And Billy Bob was just draped. His arms were draped over the canopy rail. His head was down, and he wasn't moving. And JB came over to my jet and climbed up the ladder, and he said, He said, "Hey, Colonel Strasburger," he said, "what's the matter with Billy Bob?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "I can't move." He goes, "Give me a couple of minutes, JB. I need some time to decompress." And that was just a function of, we're back on the ground. It's been an intense sortie. The wheels are chocked. The motors are shut down. And all of that adrenaline that kept us going for the last 2 hours and 15 minutes is draining out of his body.
Yeah.
And I think Billy Bob would characterize it the same way. And of course, I felt exactly the same as he did. And so we knew that it had been a noteworthy sortie. And we also expected that we were going to get in a lot of trouble. So we went back into the squadron building. We got on the SIPRnet and we started to fashion our after action report for the mission.
Yeah.
Because we anticipated our commander was going to get a telephone call. And so we sent our mission report. We described everything to Bino. Bino wrote back to us and said, "Gentlemen, you've got nothing to worry about." And interestingly enough, that narrative that we crafted and sent back to Bino, that was the basis for both my decoration and Billy Bob's decoration.
Yeah. Imagine that.
Yeah. Yep. Pretty fascinating, buddy.
Did you ever get to meet JR?
So, what a segue. The answer's yes. Approximately 2 years later, we were going to Carlisle Barracks. J.R. Sanderson was going to Air War College here at Maxwell. And I was going to what was then called the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, which is now Eisenhower School.
Yeah.
And we were both going to Jim Thorpe days at Carlisle Barracks, where you do your spring senior service school competition with each other.
Yeah.
And my DO, Spanky O'Dowd, I just saw him at Bino's funeral.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, he was the pastor that took care of all of us during that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, really
That's
cool. Really cool. And so he's going to Air War College with J.R. Sanderson. And he calls me up and he goes, "Hey, Donk, I think you and JR are going to get the opportunity to meet each other because we're all going to be at Jim Thorpe days together." And so I'm in the parking lot and I'm waiting for the Air War College bus to pull up. And it does. And I see Spanky bounding down, the aisleway in the bus, and he comes down the stairs and, we get a big hug. And, he's so full of life and he's so funny and he's just such an incredible guy. And so it's just he's just magnetic and it's awesome. And then I see JR and, he's in his Army uniform and I see his last name and I see him and, we both have exactly the same reaction. We just kind of collapse into each other's arms and we just kind of hug each other for a couple minutes and just, take it all in. We're right back at Objective Monty. It's the 6th of April, 2003. I know he didn't bring all of his soldiers home.
Yeah.
And it was emotional. It was hard. But I tell you what, man, you talk about those bonds that we forged together, not only in peacetime, but maybe more intensely in the crucible of combat. When lives are on the line, and sometimes you perform in an extraordinary fashion, and sometimes you're not necessarily on top of your game. Sometimes you make mistakes, and as they say in our business, mistakes mean that somebody doesn't come back home.
Yeah.
So it was just fascinating to meet him. We've talked to each other several times in the intervening periods. I wish I had more contact with him than what I do.
Yeah.
JR, if you're out there, brother, I love you. Love your troopers.
Glad to help.
Yeah.
That's what I said to Boots. Glad to help. As we just stood there like you and I are right now, we're like, there's not a whole lot of words spoken initially. You just kind of look at each other like, and in my mind, I was thinking, I'm just glad JR got to go home to his kids, his mom, his wife, and his kids. His Rio wasn't so fortunate, he got captured, but Boots. And that's the one thing about JR. JR got to live another day, see his wife and family because of you and Billy Bob.
Well, that's like you said, we helped.
We helped. Yeah. There was a lot going on that day.
Yeah, there was. But I tell you what, though, and I mean, this, Sluggo, Billy Bob and I just happened to be the people who were at the right place at the right time, with the right jet, the right ordnance.
Absolutely, man.
Right intel. Anybody else, who was flying that day would have done exactly the same thing. Tried to perform to the best of their ability, tried to react to the situation, and defeat the enemy, and safeguard American and coalition and alliance lives. I mean, that's what we do.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, I guess I should rephrase it, and I should say that's what we used to do. And now, I have the honor and the privilege of serving as what I will characterize as a fine professional staff officer, so that there are young field graders, company grade officers, senior NCOs, and airmen that are contributing to the joint warfighting effort and can get done what they need to get done at the tactical level, because I'm pushing the paper that hopefully sets the stage for their eventual success.
Yeah.
And
you know what, Donk? That's why I do this. I have it written up here on my wall. Every lesson learned is a problem solved. It really is. Okay. And while you were explaining to me what you were doing, MiG Killer from Desert Storm, Rick Tellini, has the perfect description of this. He calls it intuitive expertise. He says, you've trained hard, you've worked hard, and all of a sudden your brain goes into a completely different mode where you and Billy Bob are connected not just by radio, but by brainwave, even though you are in separate airplanes. And
I do. Sluggo, I know exactly what you're talking about. And interestingly enough, I felt a similar feeling with Coke.
Oh yeah,
and I know Billy Bob did too. And I always I try to always characterize that it was Coke that was on the ground. It was one of our squadron mates We were familiar with him personally and professionally.
Yeah.
We knew his family, which raised the intensity of the situation for us. But if it hadn't been Coke, we would have reacted in exactly
the same
the
way.
same way.
Absolutely.
And you know, Billy Bob is retired now. He's flying for Southwest. He and his wife Sally are doing spectacular.
Yeah.
2 sons that are in the Air Force.
Imagine
you know,
that.
beautiful daughter. And Coke and Jamie, Coke is getting ready to take over as the air-to-ground operations wing commander at Moody Air Force Base.
Oh, good for him.
He is now a colonel in the Air Force, and you know, he gets the opportunity. He's like one of the senior, what we used to call battlefield airmen in the Air Force. And just think about what those young people get the opportunity to hear from Coke. And to your point about lessons learned being problem solved, boy, you know, a guy that's got the experience he's got in Iraq, he's a national treasure, and he's got an awful lot to pass on, not only to the Air Force, but to the joint community as well.
And I tell everybody, I spend time down at Brigham Young University at the ROTC detachment down there. Okay. One of my first things I tell them, be a joint warfighter. Understand how your sister services do their business, because you will be better for it, particularly in today's world. You've got to be a joint warfighter. And I've had a lot of these young cadets tell me, I don't know if I understand what you mean. And I said, let me tell you some stories about joint warfighting. The one you just mentioned is classic, where the A-10 was called in so many times to provide support. Okay. And you've only talked about one mission, and you had how many deployments? 5? 2 to Iraq, 3 to Afghanistan. We haven't even talked about Afghanistan yet. We've been talking for 2 hours now, you know. But that's one of the great things. One of the great things about this podcast that I love so much is hearing your story, what you learned from it, and giving it to these young people that are replacing us, so that they go into a battle with a full kit bag going, oh, I remember Donk talking about this on the Lessons from the Cockpit show, you know, and others too. I mean, this is why I do this. This is why I so much enjoy this, man. So,
well, I will tell you, Sluggo, I feel privileged and I feel humbled that you extended the invitation to me. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I just hope that, you know, you and your audience will find that I articulated well enough to make it so people can maybe glean some nuggets.
There's a lot of nuggets here, brother. A lot of them. So 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Is there a particular mission in Afghanistan that like comes to your mind?
Yeah, actually there is. So, and actually, I got the privilege of going to Afghanistan 4 times.
Oh.
And as you and I have talked, you know, even though I was a 2-ship flight lead in the Green Demons at Myrtle Beach when Desert Shield, Desert Storm executed, it was the other 2 squadrons that were called to combat.
Yeah.
And Green Demons were attrition reserve. And so we only sent a few pilots right before the beginning of hostilities for Desert Storm. And so my first combat experience was a sortie in Afghanistan. And there was what I will characterize as maybe a squad, maybe a platoon-sized element from the 3rd Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment operating in eastern Iraq and RC East. And they'd been ambushed. They had taken some casualties. They too were fighting a little bit of a defensive fight, but they were also going to do everything that they could in their power to take the offense.
Yeah.
So you had enemy that was kind of on a military crest on a ridge line. There was a mountain pass with a dirt road on it, and then there was more terrain on the opposite side of the road. My wingman and I, Professor Dom Sala, we called him Prof.
Yeah.
He's a test pilot now, working in the private sector.
Yeah.
And he was my wingman that day, and it was the first opportunity that we had been called in for CAS on that deployment. And when we got to the area and we established communication, it was very difficult to establish the line of demarcation between friendly and enemy, because there were elements of this squad or platoon that were triaging and taking care of their wounded and on the radios, while the other elements kind of began bounding up the hill to engage the enemy. And I could never get clarity with regard to the separation between enemy and friendly. And so I could never really employ weapons. And thus, neither could Professor. But what we were able to do, which was exceptionally frustrating nonetheless, was we were able to overfly what we thought their positions were at very low altitude, expend flares on their positions, and at least conduct mock strafe runs against their position to either one, lower their heads so that they couldn't be offensive against the Rangers, or two, convince them not a good idea to stay and they better beat feet. And so on that particular day, we never got the opportunity to expend weapons. More than likely, based on the accuracy that was required, the only thing that we would have been able to employ was the gun, and it would had to have been at fairly close range. Yeah. To ensure that we didn't hit friendlies with dispersion. Yeah. But we could never get the right picture on the ground. And so both Professor and I left that engagement. We had another set of A-10s that were coming in. We were actually orchestrating an exfil with U.S. Army helicopters. They were going to destroy their vehicles in place with thermite grenades. They were going to exfil on the helicopters with their wounded. And then at some point in time, they would make a transition to their FOB and then subsequently to Bagram. And so Tweeter Twesme was the flight lead of the two-ship that took over for Prof and I. The Prof and I were a little bit low on gas, and we had to go back to Bagram, so we climbed up high and we pulled the power back a little bit to save gas. Lo and behold, about the time that we were recovering into Bagram, we started to hear medevac helicopters. And actually, I don't want to be erroneous here. I can't remember whether it was, slick UH-60s designed for infantry, or whether they were actually medevac, U.S. Army medevac helicopters. But they came on the frequency, and they were bringing back 2 guys that were wounded from that particular firefight. And the medevac pad was not too far away from where our jets were parked. And I remember having the opportunity to shut the airplane down, get out of the cockpit. And as those helicopters were landing, I got the opportunity to approach the back of the helicopter.
Yeah.
And, this is another one of those where, there's the heat, there's the wind blast, there's the cacophony of the rotors, there is the swirling of gauze, there's blood, there's the smell of blood, and there's 2 Rangers laying on the inside of this helicopter. And, the medics are doing their absolute best to work on them. And I remember being able to reach over, and I grabbed both of their hands, and I squeezed them, and I made eye contact with one of the guys, and I just started crying. And I was like, God, I wish we could have done more. I wish we could have done more. And then, that moment's over in a flash. They got to get the guys out of the helicopter.
Yeah.
They got to get them into the, Roll 3 hospital that we had there at Bagram. At least I think it was a Roll 3 by that time. And I remember going to the hospital and watching as they worked on these guys, and a nurse came out to me and said, "Sir, you might as well go back to the squadron. We're going to take really good care of these guys, and we'll let you know." And so I said, okay. So I went back to the squadron, and I think I got a couple hours of shut eye. And then I went back to the hospital to check on these Rangers. And one of them was on a medevac to Germany and had a good prognosis. And one of them didn't make it. And, it was crushing. It was sobering. To think about those troopers, to think about their families. And about 48 hours later, the other guys from the team came to the squadron. We were in the tower. We were in the bottom of the tower at Bagram.
Yeah.
And they came to the squadron, and they said, "Hey, we want to talk to the A-10 guys that supported us 48 hours ago in RC East." And they eventually figured out that it was Prof and me. And they had a round metallic object from the 3rd Battalion Commander, 75th Ranger Regiment. And they were so thankful. Even though we didn't get the opportunity to employ, they knew that we had done everything that we could do. The big team had done everything that we could do. And they just said, "Sir, our commander wants to present this to you." And I don't know, I must have hundreds and hundreds of round metallic objects. But that one, right? I'm with you, brother. But that one is in my retirement case.
Yeah.
I'll never, I will treasure that till the day I die.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, brother, this is a brotherhood that people don't understand. I cannot teach this to my kids and the younger generation, what this kind of camaraderie means, where when you say, "We will leave no one behind," what that really means and entails in many situations you and I have been in.
Right.
We will not leave anybody behind.
Right.
We won't do it.
So it's a sacred oath, brother.
It is. And, you know, I told you I've been editing my episode with Chuck de Bellevue. His roommate was Roger Locker. 23 days in the jungle.
Right.
Roger spent 23 days in the jungle, and they heard him on a radio. This is Oyster 01 Bravo. And they go, oh, what? When are you guys going to come get me? They sent 150 aircraft after him, called off everything the next day, and went in and got him. Sandy's escorting the helos in to pick him up, and he's only like 25 miles northwest of Baghdad, or excuse me, of Hanoi, and they get him out. They get him out because General Voigt says, our bond is we will go and get you. If you're alive or you're dead, we will bring you home no matter what. And they did. And he talked about what it was like seeing Roger again. Okay. And then having to tell his wife, well, what happened to you guys that day? He goes, oh, nothing.
Well, of course.
Nothing. I got 2 MiG kills that day, and our flight lead got shot down. The pilot was killed, and the backseater was in the jungle for 23 days. And he said, Sally, who knew Roger's wife too, and says, well, what did you guys do that day? Oh, nothing. And that's the thing about you and I, is we consider it our job. It really is nothing to us, but it makes a significant impact to those people around us. And sometimes we don't understand that significance until you see JR get off the bus.
Oh.
Or I see Boots Jones across at a mixer and walk up to him and go, hey, our lives are intertwined in ways that, you know.
So let me tell you a quick story about JT Taylor.
Okay.
Colonel, United States Army.
Yeah.
JT. He is attending Air War College, and he's telling a story about a mission that he had in Iraq. And one of his professors is a buddy of mine called Ignis Renner, formerly A-10 pilot, now Air War College PhD professor.
Yeah.
Ignis Renner. And Ignis sends me a note and he goes, hey, Donk. He goes, I think you and Lieutenant Colonel Taylor might have something in common. He goes, you should come over to our seminar. And so I go over to the seminar, and Ignis introduces the two of us, and then we begin to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And don't you know, JT Taylor was a young lieutenant medic on the ground at Objective Monty on 6 April.
No way.
Yes.
Oh.
And so we're able to kind of, put the pieces of the puzzle together. And, it just so happened I got the opportunity to make a commencement speech.
Uh-huh.
And I had the opportunity to talk about these bonds that we're talking about, and how small a world it is, and what the crucible of combat will do to men and women, and how it enriches your life at the same time burdening your life.
Yeah.
But those are things that we handle as warriors. And sometimes we need some help to handle those things.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of cool to realize that, I was a lieutenant in the skies, and I was a lieutenant colonel in the skies, and he was a lieutenant on the ground. And damn if we don't meet and then subsequently get the opportunity to attend a commencement ceremony.
those are the kinds of things that you and I look forward to. Those are the kinds of things, that's the kind of connections that are priceless too in today's world too. So,
Yes, sir.
hey, brother, we've been talking for a long time. Donk, I so appreciate you. Love having you
Well,
on.
I hope I met muster, brother. You know, you
in so many ways. And
well, like I told you, brother, I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful to your audience. I'm grateful for your patience, your willingness to let an old man, an old war horse ramble a little bit, and maybe to share a little nugget or two.
well, and I'll tell you, brother, your stories fuel my mission. It really does. And getting these stories out, 97-year-old Royce Williams shoots down 4 MiG-15s, can't tell anybody about it after the Korean War because Eisenhower sits down next to him and says, you can't talk about this. And it's stories like this, like I said, that fuel my mission to get more of these people, more people like you to tell your stories, but more importantly, what did you learn from them? And
yes, sir.
We've certainly heard that today, brother. Thanks.
Thanks,
again,
Sluggo.
Doc.
Have a great day, brother.
I will. Folks, this is why I do this. This is why I love this. What incredible stories. And to think that one of his buddies is on the ground and he recognizes his voice. Don't have to authenticate that. It's a guy from my own squadron. Thanks for joining us today. And go to my YouTube channel at Mark Hasara, and you can see this and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Again, wall pilot, best of aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar, supports financially this show and keeps it going. So please, folks, go by, pick out a couple of the ready to print 4, 6, and 8 footers, print it on vinyl like you see this 135 behind me, and stick it on your wall. Or let us do a custom one for you. I'm getting ready to do a custom F-15E Strike Eagle from Lakenheath for some customers that just returned, and I hope to have some of them on. There's an amazing story coming out of the Middle East of the Iranian drone and cruise missile attack and ballistic missile attack on Israel. A lot of people don't know that 2 American F-15E Strike Eagle squadrons were like the first line of defense. The 494th from Lakenheath just got home, and they've got red AIM-9X missile silhouettes on their airplanes. I'm being told that they shot down 80 drones and cruise missiles between the 494th and the 335th Chiefs. So, folks, thanks again for coming by and listening. Go to my YouTube page to download others and to listen to them. And I'm doing a lot of shorts right now. In about 110 days, I'm at 57 million views, and I should go over 100,000 subscribers sometime tonight or tomorrow. So I appreciate all of you who are going by my YouTube channel and taking a look. Next week, I'm going to have a MiG killer from the Vietnam War on again. Unfortunately, his camera didn't work, but there's good audio, and he talks about getting shot down, which I didn't know. So, thanks for joining us, and hope you join us next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.